Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I never know how to introduce this, so we're just going to dive right in. So last week I did the 2-pencil drawing of chives, and this week I wanted to spend some time kind of doing more exercises as far as like kind of similar to last week, where it's meant to break away kind of from realism and do more of abstract, loose illustrations. And so what I have here is a quarter, a glass like bead, you know, those like flat bottom beads that you see in like fish tanks or flower arrangements and whatnot, and a washer. So when I was in high school, I spent a lot of time working on developing my skills in realism, and I felt like it was a very tedious process for me, but I really enjoyed how I was able to capture something very realistically. However, it did get boring after a while. And one of the things that my high school art teacher had us do was sort of experiment with materials and methods. So for example, she had one of my fellow students paint with a 3-foot long stick. So he basically taped a paintbrush to a dowel and tried painting that way, and it, you know, created this really awesome, you know, painterly style. And then she gave me this suggestion of like, I don't remember, I assume she gave me the suggestion. I don't know how we came up with the idea, but basically throwing water balloons filled with paint out our second story window of the school onto a big canvas. And then, so it was challenging to fill the water balloons with paint, and sometimes they would fall, and then because we were only 2 stories up, they didn't break. So then we just went full on bottles of tempera paint and just dumped it out the window and tried to like paint something with just drips. And so with that particular painting, I let it dry, and the tempera paint made like this cool kind of texture as it cracked and dried and stuff. And then I painted over that. And I'd say from that project, I started to really enjoy loosening up and painting over textures. And it's funny because then my university professor for like my painting classes, she preferred extremely smooth surfaces. So she, you know, taught us techniques on, you know, layering the gesso, like the her suggestion for like ratio of water to gesso and kind of, you know, watering it down a bit so it goes on smooth, and then sanding between coats, applying repeated coats until like the tooth of the canvas was smooth enough. And she kind of, for one of our assignments, she graded us on how smooth it felt. And so it's just useful to experiment with different techniques and take different, you know, teachers or people's styles and preferences into account and try different things. That was kind of a little bit of what last week was with, you know, I saw somebody on Instagram drawing with 2 hands at the same time. And although chives was not the best subject to draw with 2 hands, I will try that again. I want to try doing like, I think what they were drawing on Instagram was a face. And so I think trying it with something a little bit more complex would be an interesting exercise. But this exercise that I'm going to do today, essentially what you do with this is you take either a coin or, you know, I have a washer or one of these little glass beads, and you put your pencil or your pen, your marker, whatever it is you have on the paper. You kind of move the bead around on the paper, drawing as you go. And the example that I saw of this, and again, I don't even remember where I saw it originally. It was probably on Instagram or TikTok or something. It was just creating like a abstract line drawing, and then you'd go back in and like color in the spaces between the lines in, you know, whatever pattern that you want. So what I want to do is try to specifically draw something using the bead. But obviously, like, the bead has to stay in front of the pencil, so I have to try to steer it where I want to draw. That is going to be the challenge for today. And the reason why I took out the quarter, the washer, and the bead is because like the quarter has some resistance, the glass bead slides around really easily, and the washer is a little bit more rough than the coin, so it scoots around a little bit slower. So I just wanted to see if there was like a preference or something. And I was going to pick something out of the book, but I decided that I have in mind that I want to try to draw just a carrot Just the carrot itself, not all the greenery at the top. So in high school, when I was having to break away from realism and do more of this like abstract style with the, throwing paint out the window, it was frustrating, but I do think this is really hard. It's beneficial to sort of push yourself outside of your comfort zone, because it helps with, I feel like the mentality, or like the saying is like, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. I'm not saying you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, but in regard to like drawing, if you're only sticking with techniques and media that you're comfortable with, what can you do to push yourself to grow? Try to approach it with like a level of curiosity, and for me, low expectations. So yeah, just kind of going into it with low expectations and some curiosity of like, okay, how do I do this? How do I push this little bead around? And something else that I was reflecting on recently is, because I was so hung up on realism, I only ever wanted to put in the work on the actual piece itself. And so I very rarely did, any sort of ideation, like prep work. Like maybe I'd sketch something out a little bit ahead of time, but for the most part, I just dove right into the canvas or whatever it was I was painting. And when I started to, think of not doing that, what kind of opened my eyes to the idea that that it's actually more beneficial to put in the work ahead of time to test something out, rather than putting so much value and importance on the, gessoed canvas or the piece of paper, that expensive piece of paper that you're saving for just this. This looks awful. This was the glass bead. It scoots around really easily, and I feel like I don't have much control over it. So I'm going to try, I think, the washer next. I'll try both extremes and see which one I prefer. But anyway, the amount of work involved in a single painting with like high level of realism, it made me want to just put if I'm going to spend any time working on this, it's going to be on the final piece. And the thing that kind of got me to, again, step out, like think outside of that, was going to the museum, going to the local museum by me growing up, and seeing a painting by Thomas Cole. And they had the main work, and then next to it, this is not going well. I'm not fully focused on what I'm doing here. The main work, this is not carrot-like, this is turd-like. The main painting was hung up, and then next to it was a small version of a section of the painting. So it was like the figure in a boat or something like that. And I found that interesting. Like it was obvious that it was like a draft of, like the painter was basically doing this figure ahead of time on a separate canvas, like small canvas, to kind of map out what he was going to do on the main canvas. But it was a very almost like, even though it was not as polished as the final painting, it was still a very involved painting. And so it just seemed daunting, the idea of putting in all that work for something that's not going to be the final piece. And I think that's been one of the challenges that I faced as an artist, is like putting so much value on the final product rather than the process, which again, I talked about that in the last episode. This almost looks like South America. This is not a carrot. Maybe if I focus more, I feel like I'm looking more at the whole piece rather than at my pen or at my pencil and the washer. And I'm trying to draw like the texture lines in the carrot, which might be like, why am I putting in that much detail? I guess I could try. Yeah, it's really easy to scoot this thing around in a circle and go not where I want it to go. Let's go over here. I'm really aiming for like a skinny carrot, but I keep getting like a really wide top and a chunky bottom. So yeah, I just kind of, I mean, when I was looking at it, I kind of felt like that draft could be a whole work on its own. And it seemed like a lot of work to paint something twice. But again, in high school and college, you're like working toward assignment deadlines. So if I'm working, not thinking about those sorts of deadlines and it's just painting for myself, what's the rush? I don't do commissions currently, so I'm not working toward anybody's deadline. And then also, I feel like there was a lot of anxiety when working on, just the final canvas. It's like, if I screw this up, this is it. I'm gonna have to stretch a new canvas, or I have to like figure out how to fix a mistake. So it just felt like there was a lot riding on that final piece rather than taking the time to experiment and play and test drive something on a piece of scrap or, something that's lower pressure. And I would think of it like, okay, if I were a surgeon, I wouldn't dive right into surgery. I'm going to spend hours and hours like training and, working on techniques before I cut into the real thing. I'm assuming. I'm not a surgeon. I don't know what you guys do. But thinking of it like that, like why as an artist would I dive into the main piece without the testing, the learning, the experimenting, and understanding the subject, that I'm painting. Like with Thomas Cole's painting, he painted the figure before actually painting the figure on the painting. And not everybody works that way. Like you'll see, I know I've, heard of, x-rays of paintings and they see like layers of, different things that people painted over and whatnot. Or they like redo a face. I don't know. It's nice to slow down the pace and actually spend time testing before diving into the real thing. So far, I don't like this. I think I'm going to try the quarter now and see how that goes. I guess I just don't know how to do, like if I'm doing this technique, how do I get a point? So if I have to constantly be pushing it forward, it's like I only ever get rounded. It's really easy to do figure eights though. It just looks like a turd. What is this? I'm just going back and forth. This looks awful. All right, I'm going back to the glass bead. Wait, maybe if I start at the bottom. I feel like this is better for something abstract. It's a very abstract carrot if you want it to be a carrot. Fast does not make better. Let's try a marker. Maybe adding color will make it look better. I don't know. This is just not the technique for me. This is not working. Or again, maybe I need to do something not stick shaped. Let's get away from vegetables, shall we? So enough with the carrot. Let's do a face. So it's just gonna be a made up face. And we're going to see how this goes. Let's do bright green. Why not? Oh boy. That's going rogue. Not the way I wanted to go. All right. We got to adapt. This is not going how I wanted it. This might have to be like a goblin face or something. This is such a hard technique to do something that looks like something. Like if you're aiming for something, challenging. Maybe with practice I could get better at this. I'm just really not good at steering this little glass bulb or this little glass bead. So the other thing with me, I'm gonna leave it there. It ain't great. My face, goblin face. We're just gonna go with goblin face and carrot. Sign my name to that. The other thing about me is like I'll try something and if it's not going well, I'll stop. And then if I have enough desire to get better at it, I will kind of think about it when I'm having more like passive brain time, when I'm not actively doing something. So like falling asleep, or I'm in the shower, or, washing dishes, sort of like mindless chores, or, whatever. And it'll kind of drift into my mind of like, oh, I wonder how it would work if I did this or if I did this. So especially when I know I'm not actually being watched by anyone. I'm definitely not being washed by anyone. If I'm being watched by someone, it's harder for me to really be in the moment with what I'm doing. And so it'll be interesting if I let myself ponder this more. Or I will never come back to this again, which is a total fine possibility. So with that, I encourage you to play around with this technique if you want to kind of break away from traditional illustration styles, if you want to do something abstract, or experiment in some other way. And tag me on Instagram if you end up posting it. Don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. I appreciate it. And with that, I will see you next week. Bye!